Okay, so the technique I'm going to show you at this point is a little bit more advanced, and it might be a little bit extreme for what I'm about to show you. So if I go ahead and just play through this sequence here, I have a C-stand going behind a beard. Now, I could just start to do the previous techniques to paint out these, paint around these hair follicles, but you can see at this frame, things get a little bit dicey because there's just so much detail there to paint around, and there's just a heavy lift and darkness of the brightness values thanks to the C-stand in the shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a frame. Again, I just need to only do this between frames 1072 and 1086, as you can see. So I'm going to just go ahead and play it through. So if you kind of take a look as I move, you have to make a choice between beginning. If you're going to do like what I'm going to do here, which is basically freeze this frame and let it run through as a frozen frame, you got to either choose the heads or the tails here. So you can see if you take a look at the animation, the bearded guy actually, his head starts to kind of turn to the left towards camera. So we're actually revealing information back here. This technique will give you a possibly flattish look to a certain area, but if it's done quickly and quietly in a very small area and flat enough, meaning the camera's far enough back and it's not such a wide angle so that you don't have that much parallax as you can see around in this situation, you can get away with it, but it's not recommended all the time because it's computationally sometimes expensive and it's a little overkill. So I'm going to come to frame 1072 where I've done about as much paint work as I possibly can. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a roto node, and we are going planar. You could do a 2D track on this, but we want to actually take into account the deformation information happened to the hair follicles. So I'm going to grab the hair follicles, as many as I possibly can, even though the possibility of the C-stand passing through this will actually possibly give me errors. So I'm just going to get as much as I possibly can here. And then I'm going to kind of grow out to this, probably about this far here. So there we go. Okay. So this, again, I'm going to redo this roto later, but I just want to grab as much hair information as I can. And again, you can move this a little bit closer if you would prefer, but it's going to track and make like sort of a grid warp on any contrast points it can get within this tracking information. So we're going to right-click this and make it a, right-click and make it a planar tracker. And I'm going to hit this little R button here to track planar track forward, and I'm going to have to change my frame range here from 1072 to, in this case, 1086. All right, that's the frame range I want to do. Or you could just go ahead and hit this play forward button, but I like to do this range so it just stops. And go ahead and just play it through. And there it goes. And thankfully the C-stand is not causing too much interference there. We did kind of miss out on this little follicle right here. So we'll see what happens. So it is taking some time, obviously. There's a lot of stuff going on in my comp right now. It's probably bogging this down. But the stretching and the warping of this is being taken into account. So just be aware of that. So just let this kind of go through. I'm not sure why it's taking so long, but oops, I guess it went too far. So I'll just hit cancel there. Okay. So as you can see, if we take a look at the physical planar folder, you take a look here, we should have plenty of tracked auto tracks. So we're going to take this Bezier and say goodbye to it. And now we have some information that we can use to kind of work on this. So we're going to go back to our reference frame. If you ever want to know where your reference frame is, it's the frame that you first laid your first initial key and you did your first initial start before you tracked. So you can go to reference frame. You could also, if you decide to work at the end of the actual frame, you could actually go to the last frame and say set to reference frame, set current frame to reference frame. So that's another possibility. But we're going to stick with frame 1072 as our reference frame here. So we're going to come over here and export out a corner pin relative and say create, like that. And we're also going to do a frame hold. So we'll do a frame hold, and I'll just put this off to the side here. And of course this is going to be frame 1072. There we go. And with frame 1072, we now have a frozen frame. So we are going to come over here and add this corner pin to it. So just throw that in. It's going to start warping it. And then we will take this roto and break it. And we're going to plug that in right here. I'll put my viewer to it. And now putting inside this planar tracker folder, we are going to create our roto. And we are basically going to get as close to this edge as possible without actually touching the transparent areas. Okay, so let's go ahead and just move right here. And again, you can go as far out as you want here in this case. So if this image has grain in it, you should definitely degrain it, because we're going to regrain it right now. You don't want to add grain onto static grain, so you can use a lot of degraining tools for that. So anyway, now that we've done that, this obviously needs to be in the folder. So make very sure that this is inside the Planar Tracker folder, and we can see that it's looking good. And at this point, we are going to come over here to Roto and put this to Output Alpha Premelt RGB, replace. So we have this cutout. So you can take a look at the corner pin. The corner pin is basically warping the image around like crazy here. The inside area is fine. And then we have the Roto, which cuts it out like so. Okay. So what we can do, if we go back to our original frame, 1072, we can go ahead and grab all of these dots here. If you hit the letter E, for extend, we can extend this out by hitting just hitting it once. It's probably good enough, and it'll extend all that out. So basically, you can see we have like the animated version of this here. You can see things are a little bit crazy on our hair follicle here, but that little nuance of animation might actually work to our advantage. So we can go ahead and now hit the M for merge button and throw this on here and pull this over here. And again, you can see our frame range here. So I'm going to go to 1072, which was our first frame, and we're going to mix this merge node off and right click and say set key. The next frame we're going to merge it on. And then when we get to the last frame, 1090, I think it's 1080, 85, I could be wrong. We're going to right click and say set key, and then we'll move over one frame and take that to 0. Okay. So now if we kind of take a look at the merging of all of this together and go ahead and hit play, we can kind of see that if I go ahead and hit letter Q to hide the overlays, we're never going to be able to tell if this is working right if we don't like extend this out. So this is the working area 1072 to 1086. So what I can do is extend this out a couple frames. Really, it's not so much the beginning of the frame because this is exactly a perfect still of what we had before, but really it's the end of the frame that we got to worry about. So now we can go ahead and hit play and just see that how the transition's looking, and it's looking pretty good. We have a person that emerges there. So the question is, let's see that we have like a jump right here between these two frames. You can see this hair follicle gets a little wacky, right? See that? Okay, so what you want to do is we want to come in here to this specific frame right here. Actually, let's go back to our first frame, 1072. And we're going to add a spline warp tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a spline warp tool. And you could also transition this over 2 frames if you wish for like a cross dissolve. But the spline warp tool, we're going to go ahead and kind of work on these little hair follicles down here. I'm going to put this before the corner pin. It's going to go to the A input, as you can see here. I'm going to put my viewer to the spline warp here, hit the letter Q to bring back my overlays. And I'm going to layer down a couple of pin tools. This will help kind of cushion the areas that I don't want to move at all. So I'll kind of throw those around. And I'm not going to worry about these areas right here. I'm going to fill in the interior too, because I just want to work on these hair follicles. Finally, I'm going to come over here and grab a actual Bezier. And again, I'm looking before I'm putting this, my viewer is currently set to the spline warp here. So I'm going to layer in a couple of hair follicles. You get this like brightness thing going. So kind of do your own version of, you know, some of these isolated curls, and then hit the arrow key to kind of pop out of it. And then we can come over here and maybe grab another hair follicle. You know, maybe I can grab, I'll draw like a little line. I'm more worried about this one right here, so I think I'll just deal with this one for this example. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this, and I'll just call it follicle, whatever. Okay. And you're going to right-click this and say duplicate and join. Everything's going to be done in the A side. Make sure you have A warped here, so you can see the warpage. And this makes a duplicate with a number 1 at the end, so you want to take your original and lock it so you don't accidentally select it. And now you have this follicle 1. And this follicle 1 allows you to now animate it. Now we have a set keyframe on here, which we can also just click this button, but at this frame we have a follicle animation at this frame. So I'm going to keep going here. As you can see, if I go ahead and just play this through. And if we come to this frame here, just before the on-off, 1086, if we go to the corner pin animation, you could see kind of follows along with it. But now we can offset this a little bit by actually changing this. So you can see what's happening here. If I undo it, it's warping. Kind of hard to see because things go bright, but you can now warp this to match up with the silhouette of what you have at the bottom here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I can come over here, and I'm going to come over here, and you can just see if I kind of come to this frame. This is the last frame before it goes into complete 0 opacity, and I'll disable and re-enable. Let's see, maybe I have to go back another frame. Maybe it just takes some time, I don't know. Maybe I got to put my viewer to it, huh? Yeah, I may have a good idea. So I'll go to 1085 and go to this merge node. Again, if you can see the merge node here, it goes from on to off here. So I'm going to stay at the frame just before it goes off. And now, again, I can just hit this D to disable to see the difference and change. So I can see that it's kind of bunched up here, and it needs to be stretched out a little bit here. So what I can do is I can come to my spline warp while looking through the merge node. And it's kind of guesswork, as you can see. You can still see the hair follicles kind of following, but I can see the hair follicles further down there. So what I can do is I can grab this Bezier, the hair follicle 1, and try to match this up to this area right here. And you can also move the whatchamacallits too, these guys, if you feel that you need to. So now if I go ahead and disable this on and off, so undo that last one there. Something goofy happened. So if I disable and re-enable there, you can see it's not the greatest. And then you can see for these guys, which have keyframes as well, you know, you can move this forward a little bit. You can see the disable on and off here. Now things are getting a little bit goofy here. So there's different ways. You could also use a grid warp if you wish. And we can also try to come into our dope sheet for this, just for this merge node here. So if we go to this merge node, we go to the dope sheet, and you can see if we kind of look, we've got the animation going from on and off here on the mix, that I can maybe back this up by just 1 frame. So the transition between this will be, as you can see here. So let me just use my arrow keys and go through. So there's the old, and look at that, we transitioned to the new. So it's very, it's pretty convincing in a moving shot. Again, there is some flaws in here. You can do all types of stuff to get this to work right. You can use just a simple translation tracker and then use spline warps to do the work if you're not a big fan of corner pin. If you want motion blur, make sure you turn on motion blur up a little bit, but in this case I'm not going to do it. Also make sure coming down the pipe you have a opaque alpha. You can use a shuffle node with your alpha set to white. Otherwise, what I'm about to do won't work, and that is to add grain, because obviously this shot is what it is. So you want to get to the point just before the corner pin work. You can do after the corner pin work, and then add a grain, and then you're good to go. So again, I'll just add a grain node, throw that in there, and we can kind of look at the merge node here and go in the middle of the shot. And again, you cannot see any grain, because if I take a look at this footage by itself here and hit the letter A for alpha, there is no alpha. So I can just go ahead and make a shuffle node here. And you can do this in your read node, just say auto alpha. But I'm going to go ahead and just make sure alpha has a white. So now the grain will show up. So now I can take the grain and try to match it to the original footage here, which comes into the merge node. So you can see right now this noise is way too intense, so I always dial this down a little bit, as you can see, just so there's some noise in there. And then I can disable, re-enable. I can go into each individual channel if I want. I'm just going to leave it pretty low for this case. In this case, yeah, it's pretty low. The corner pin also blurs your image a little bit because of the sampling. So you might want to put this to Mitchell, which gives you maybe a sharper look. You know, there's a whole bunch of here you can do. You can also, if you want to do something very rough, you can do cubic. You know, you could play with these. You might get black edges in this workflow. You could see impulse is good, but it's just way too sharp. It can give you some weird artifacts. You can also, if you want, add a sharpen after this. So just before the grain, you can add a sharpen node. Again, this does introduce black artifacts around contrasty edges, but you can see how it does definitely help a little bit. So you can put this maybe down to 2 and 2 or 1 and 1. And that's going to help bring back that detail, because you can see if I go back to the merge node, turn it off and on, it's actually not too bad. So I probably only need to put like 1 and 1 for sharpening. So there is an order to this madness, like I said, and so it is doing a pretty decent job. And then the transition in this area right here is a little bit finicky, so we'll have to kind of test that out. So let me go ahead and just show you the finished work, cache through. So what we're going to do is, you can take the merge node here. You can see the in and out points. And for the heck of it, I'll just get a little bit more tails, a little bit more heads and tails there, just so you can see the full transition. So there's the finished product. You can see a little bit of a jump of the hair, kind of pops up a little bit. But you can, if you wanted to, you can like do an animated transform node in here. So that would obviously be placed maybe after or before the corner pin relative, so that it doesn't have that kind of jump. It's almost like a jitter, almost like wind might have hit the actual beard. But it could, from far away, this is so close up, you guys be like, oh my gosh. But honestly, it's nothing that you want to look for pops and so forth. But this does give you a flat look, just to let you know. So we can go ahead, and what's good to also come over here and put this to like 8 frames per second so you can play it through quietly. There might be some flutter from some of the kind of workflow that we'd be doing in regards to the this corner pin here might be causing a little bit of jumping around. That jumping around, actually, believe it or not, probably might be from the actual planar tracker picking up on the actual bar as it goes by, because you can see it changes slightly. So one of the things you could adjust for is do your planar tracker more closer on the inside. The only reason why you want to get the outside here is because you want to grab a hold of these little follicles and what they're doing, so they transform. But you can see here we do have a slight jump in the planar tracker that's causing the beard, it almost looks like a wave of wind hits the beard. But trust me, from far away, and maybe with just a refix of your planar track work, everything will be actually fine. In fact, everything is actually connected here. So for instance, if you take a look, this rotoplanar is connected. So I could actually, if I wanted to, go back to this here. So if I put if I were to take this, pop it out, and then redo the track information, it would propagate to all these nodes that I have connections to. You can see if I there are connections throughout here. So again, just stuff that you can kind of play with and kind of just mess with. And I think it'll help you out as far as, like I said. So next time, just when you do the planar tracking, just go on the inside here. And then if you want to deal with these hair follicles, stick with the spline warp to have the rest of that stuff done for you.